Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sheung Mofikoya, and I'll be the moderator for today. I'm a research associate with the organic team here at Kentucky State University, and I'll be introducing our speaker for today. Um, our speaker will be Sara Martin, and she will be speaking on using ecological practices and Appalachian ingenuity to grow year-round in challenging environments. Thank you.
All right, so how do I do this? All right. I'm a very low-tech person, and this is a very fancy setup. It's exciting. And I'm also really nervous because how is somebody supposed to follow such an amazing presentation that we saw earlier? I'm just absolutely smitten. Yeah, so I hope that I can keep you guys awake after that delicious lunch, and hope that I can share some information with you guys about what we're doing. Usually I do like to encourage folks to ask a lot of questions during a presentation, but I've got a lot of really good info in here. So if at any point you need me to clarify something that I've said, please do, ask me to do so. But if you've got some big questions, if we can save most of those till the end, that way we can make sure that I get you the best bang for your buck. We should have plenty of time at the end to do a bunch of deep diving into some of these topics that I'm going to talk about with you guys. My name is Sara. I'm going to introduce myself because I'm a farmer just like you guys. I am an Appalachian girl. I grew up in West Virginia and Kentucky and went to Eastern Kentucky University. And I moved to Western North Carolina to go to graduate school at Western Carolina University and just absolutely fell in love with the deep ecology of the Smoky Mountains. They're some of the oldest mountains in the world. And I moved there to study herbaceous biodiversity and did my graduate research there, and I just couldn't bring myself to leave. And I became the director of research at an environmental education center there, and then ended up landing a professorship at a local college and taught there for 15 years and helped to start their early college program for high-risk high school students. So I taught college-level biology to high-risk high school students for 15 years, which was a really fun job. And then I started having some health issues, and so I had to leave my job, but it gave me the opportunity to put all of my work and effort into our business, which is called Sustainabilities. And I became a full-time market farmer about 3 years ago, and so even though we were farming before that, this has been our sole source of income for the past 3 years. And I do a lot of work with agricultural nonprofits and food security programs, as well as I help run our local farmers market. And one of the main missions of us just in our life and everything we do is to help to build a healthier and more sustainable community. And working with the farming community, I felt like was a really powerful way to do that. And on our little farm, we have a 20-member CSA. We sell at 2 farmers markets, and we work with 2 restaurants. Living outside of Asheville, North Carolina, there's a lot of really cool restaurants that want to work with small market farmers. We also provide produce to 2 breweries and a bakery. And so, so what exactly is this talk going to be about? It's a big mouthful, that title. And so I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about our journey to develop our incredibly unconventional farm, and talk to you guys about some of the ecological practices and methods that have brought us the most success. I hope I don't talk anybody out of farming. If you have a challenging environment, I'm probably definitely going to make you all question my sanity as you see some of these pictures. But I hope that I will be able to provide you with some helpful advice on making a small farmstead that can really contribute to a sustainable local food network. And hopefully by the end of the talk, I will help you guys realize how important it is that everybody that feels inspired to grow does so. It doesn't matter if you have an unconventional or what you see as a challenging environment, you really should go for it. And the reason that you should is because unconventional farms really are the key to global food security. In the recent past, technology and the chemical revolution has really let us move food production to concentrated areas. You know, you don't see little farms all over the place like you used to 100 years ago. We have these big industrial farms that have concentrated our food production. And increased global population as well as degraded farmlands is really necessitating increasing the land that we have in food production. And much of the land that we feel like is perfect farmland is either in production already, or it's been degraded with unsustainable practices, or it's been developed. You know, I couldn't believe it when I came home and I was driving from Winchester to Frankfort. I grew up in Winchester, and just seeing all of the farms that I remember as a teenager, you know, they're turning into housing developments. And it just makes me so sad because, you know, we can't eat money. And so we have to think about how can we turn lands that we don't really consider farmlands into farms. Because sustainable food production is really necessitating a lot of small, non-traditional farms that can provide greater biological diversity as well as healthy ecosystems for our communities. You know, the UN, their council, global council, actually identified as small organic farms are the way to feed the world, not big industrial farms. And those farms are important, and they do provide a service, but you know, that's not the answer for everything. Because these huge operations really impact biodiversity in a negative way, as well as they really have negative impacts on water quality. And unfortunately, they produce lower quality food and a lot of waste. If you actually look at our produce, it has lost about 40% of its nutritional value in the past 50 years because our soils are degraded and our food is transported such a long way that nutrients break down during that transport. And only a small portion of our actual food that goes into our mouths is grown on U.S. farmland. We've outsourced a lot of our production of fruits and vegetables to other countries. And so the key is not just producing on more land, but diversifying how we produce this food. And so we really can embrace ingenuity and technology and all of this amazing agricultural innovation that we have had over the past generation to grow in a much wider variety of areas that we don't currently use for food production. And if you think about it, our ancestors grew all over the place. I love seeing pictures of farms from 100 and 150 years ago where you see these farmers growing in these amazing little pieces of property that, you know, you're just like, wow, I can't believe they were growing food there. And there are a lot of countries, especially countries that have strong indigenous cultures, that still grow on lands that we would consider unviable for growth. They're steep, they have challenging climates. You know, everybody gets those warm feelies when we see pictures of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites of the Chinese rice terraces on those steep hillsides. And I was actually first introduced to the concept of permaculture in Ecuador. I went down there to study tropical biodiversity when I was in college and saw people in the Andes Mountains growing food on these terraces, and they were doing it completely sustainably and had been doing it for thousands of years to feed their communities. And so it's completely possible for us to grow food sustainably in these environments that are very different from what we consider traditional farmland. As we have the ability to build soils, we have the ability to harness the microbiota in those soils, and we can use well-bred varieties of plants to be productive almost anywhere on Earth. And so our story as farmers, we actually never intended to be farmers. We call ourselves accidental farmers. You know, neither one of us grew up on a farm, and our property is pretty extreme for commercial farming. We bought a piece of land that we were planning on just homesteading on. We had always intended on growing our own food, but I was going to be a college professor to provide our external income. And that's what we were going to do for a living. We've got 17 acres, but we only use about 1.5 acres, and we have less than 1 acre in actual vegetable production. Our property is actually nestled in a high mountain cove at 3,600 feet in elevation, just outside of the Smoky Mountains. And we're actually surrounded by 3,000 acres of protected forest. So we're really tucked in. The good old song that you hear about, you know, you can never leave Harlan alive when the sun comes up at 10 and it's gone at 4. You know, that's kind of how it is at our house. And so a lot of the things I talk about are going to be maybe not necessarily applicable to those of you who live here in Kentucky and all of this beautiful farmland where you get all this amazing sunlight and you have this incredible climate for farming. But I think that a lot of the techniques and ideas that I'm going to share with you guys will be really valuable. One of the most valuable pieces of advice I have is do not farm alone. Find a sucker or suckers that are willing to farm with you. My husband actually grew up in Southern California. He was a BMX riding kayak guy. He never thought he was going to be a farmer. And I call him my partner in grime because we are a hand-powered farm, and it is just the two of us that do everything on our farm. He actually ended up working in sustainable remodeling when we moved to Western North Carolina, and he got a degree in remodeling and building design, as well as a degree in welding and metal fabrication. So we do have a blacksmith shop on our farm, and we do sell metalwork as a side business to help supplement our farm income. He also took a bunch of business classes in building this, and so this was really powerful because it helped us with business planning for our farm. I really recommend that you do that. And one of the keys to our success is he is willing to try anything, and he is absolutely unafraid to fail. We joke about how you can come and visit our farm and we can teach you how not to do a lot of things. And then let you go home and make your own mistakes, because that's kind of what it's like when you're farming. You're constantly learning, and if you're not making mistakes, you're not playing big enough. You're not going outside the box, and that's where you can learn the most, we feel. And when you find your sucker, it doesn't necessarily have to be your spouse. It might actually be easier sometimes if it's not your spouse. You just need to find a business partner that you can work with, someone that you can make mistakes with, and someone that, most importantly, you can have fun with. But do make sure that person is invested in the future of your farm. And so our first adventure in farming was actually growing plant starts. My degree is in botany, and I love to grow. And so we really kind of got into this by growing plant starts at the farmer's market. And we have a 25 by 28 heated greenhouse where we grow these plant starts. And this is a really great piece of advice I have for you if you're going to have a really small farm, is really maximize your income from your small spaces. Try to make as much money as you can per square foot. Even if you have access to a huge piece of property, the more you spread yourself out, the more spread out you will become. And so really try to concentrate that income from small spaces. And we make a large portion of our farming income just off that little greenhouse. Another thing that we did that I highly recommend is we made this space productive year-round. We actually put it on a site where the top half of the area was not suitable for growing, but the bottom has a growing bed in it. So right now, you can see in that lower picture there, my husband's putting our shelves up right before we started putting our plants in. But you can see there's soil down there, and that's actually full of Asian greens right now. We're growing bok choys and Tokyo bacana and a bunch of other really lovely Asian greens in the lower part of that greenhouse for the winter. And one of the things that I love about growing plant starts is it really gives us independence from industrial greenhouses for our plants. We have a lot of friends who use industrial supply houses for their plants, but the problem is I don't know how many times they've told me that they showed up and the plants were pitiful, or they had disease, or they did some kind of a substitution and they didn't even get what they wanted. And so by growing our own plants, we can ensure that we get the varieties that grow best for our farm, and we get what works for our area. And I also feel really good about selling these plants to all of the local growers around where we're at, all of the farmers, as well as just small gardeners, because I know that they're getting varieties that are going to be really, really productive for them, as opposed to them going to Lowe's and just getting the varieties that everybody is growing across the South. Western North Carolina has a very unique growing environment. We have, really cool nights. We have a lot of rain. There's a lot of disease pressure from fungi. And so, you have to have well-selected varieties. And also, it saves us a ton of money. If you're really growing for a living, you grow a lot of plants, especially if you're doing really successful crop rotations. And you can get yourself into a big expense if you're spending money on plant starts from somebody else. So growing for yourself is a really smart move. I also recommend, as you're setting up your farm, to really build smart infrastructure. Like I said before, we had intended on being homesteaders, and so we set our farm up so that we could be as independent as possible. We weren't really setting up initially to be commercial. And so some of the things that we did to make our farm more functional was we put a passive solar greenhouse on our home. And this doubles for plant starts because we always make sure to try to use our structures for multiple things. We also put in a dome greenhouse that we can use for year-round growing. We actually have avocado trees, lemon trees, and all kinds of really neat stuff going in there. And then we have my husband's old construction equipment that he's got in there. We actually have scaffolding set in there that we can overflow with our pepper and eggplant starts in the spring when it's really cold, because those guys like to stay extra warm. And we do a lot of mushroom production in the shade. We're actually getting ready to inoculate a whole bunch of shiitake mushrooms when I get home from the conference. And another thing that we did was we built a 7.5 kilowatt solar system for our farm. So we actually produce more electricity than we use during the day. We put green energy back onto the grid. And we, instead of just sticking those panels on our house or somewhere else, we built a storage shed that we can put all of our firewood and construction materials underneath it. And so by having this multi-use material, as well as having these structures, it lets us to really reduce our needs for income, because as a farmer, I'm sure you guys are all perfectly aware of this, you're not going to get rich. And so the more frugally you can live, the less income you have to make. And so being smart about your structures is really a good idea. And also putting your structures in the least desirable locations for growing. I don't know how often I'll have folks that'll invite me out to their place and they'll be putting stuff right in the middle of excellent growing spaces. And I'm just like, oh, you really want to grow there, not, put a gazebo right there. And so, just thinking about where you're putting your stuff and really planning is a really good idea. And one of the things that I can recommend to you guys is to farm intentionally. Time equals money, especially when you have a small farm and you're a human-powered farm and there's just two of you. We have to really think about how we spend our time. And so some of the time-saving strategies that have helped us out the most and made us the most productive are thinking about our tools. Because we are hand-powered, we have to use smart tools. We can't take a tractor into our farm fields because of our fields are all terraces. And so we had to determine which tools are best for our bodies as well as for the workload. And sometimes it can be tough, to spend $100 on a rake when you've already got a bunch of old rakes in your shed and you're like, why is this one so much better? But then when you do get that $100 rake and you realize how much time it saves you, and next thing you know, you have another $100 rake, so you can simultaneously rake. And you realize, using something like a planting rake can save you hundreds of hours over the growing season because your rows are straight and it makes things easier on you and it can get chunks out of your soil. It's really nice. So wire weeders are another thing that have really helped us out a lot. I don't know if you guys are familiar with using wire weeders, but doing your weeding ahead of time and getting those weeds when they're little tiny babies, as opposed to getting on your hands and knees and pulling weeds out. It took our weeding job on our farm from 4 days a week weeding to less than a day weeding. And we just make sure to go through once a week with those wire weeders and knock everything back. And it's been a huge transformation for us. Another thing that we did was we invested in a tractor and a conveyor belt for the back of our truck. We don't, like I said, use those tractors in our farm field, but what we do is we use it for moving wood, we use it for moving compost, we scraper blade for snow and gravel, and we use it for mulch. We make a lot of mulch on our farm because we don't use any plastic mulches, and so it allows us to create that product ourselves. Another thing that we did was really organize and declutter our farm. There's a book out there called The Lean Farm, and it's a really amazing book. I've got it listed in the resources that I have at the end of my presentation. And I read that, and it just really blew my mind. My father-in-law actually works for Toyota, and that's actually the first place that instituted that lean farm idea, or the lean idea from Japanese culture in the United States. And the guy who wrote that book got that idea by actually going to a Toyota factory and seeing how they did their stuff. And the idea is just making sure that you're not wasting time on stuff that's not making you money. And we kind of trick ourselves into thinking things are making us money that aren't really. And so I highly recommend you just really think about, are you making money on something? And if you're not, try to figure out the least amount of time you can spend doing that. So we do a lot of greens on our farms, and so we had to build a real wash and pack area. You can't make a living washing your produce on sawhorses under your farmer's market tent. You have to have a nice place to actually process your produce. And we built a cold storage with a CoolBot. If you guys aren't familiar with CoolBots and you've thought about building a cold storage or refrigeration, I highly recommend you check out that company. It was actually a farmer who was also an engineer, I believe, in a previous life, and he figured out a way to trick a window air conditioner unit into creating a refrigeration system. And you can build a really nice refrigeration structure for a really cheap cost. And if you start looking into actual refrigerators to put on your farm, it'll blow your mind how expensive those bad boys are. So that CoolBot really transformed things for us, because we didn't have to harvest everything on Friday before market on Saturday. We could harvest all week and put it in that cold storage. And another thing that we did was we built ourselves a bubbler for our salad greens. One of our biggest products on our farm is salad mix. It's in a bag. It's a great way to make money growing salad mix. It's also something that you can do a lot of layering with, growing those salad greens under other crops. And we do at least 50 pounds a week. And so having that soil on your plants and having aphids and all that kind of stuff, we were doing a 3-bay sink system in colanders, and it was taking us about 8 hours to wash that salad. But using that bubbler, now it's like 2 hours. And also, too, our hands are not completely hypothermic by the end of the time you're done. In the wintertime, every time it's coming time for the market, we're like, oh, whose job is it to dip the salad? Because you really will, you'll freeze your poor little hands off. So having this is really nice. You can just drop your salad in the jacuzzi, and it gets to dance around in there for a little while, and it saves you a ton of time. So when you're building your farm, one of the things to be the most productive is to build your soils. I have a lot of people that ask me, well, what's the magic behind this or that? And really, all of it all boils down to having really healthy soils. Most sites that you're going to find are going to have thin soils. I think that dirt is one of our biggest exports from American farmland. I heard a guy give me some kind of statistic that you could wrap a train around the earth 3 times every year with the amount of soil that goes into the Gulf of Mexico off of American farmland. And it just blows my mind to think of all that soil that washes away. So really building soils is important, and doing a soil test is key. I always hear people asking about what types of fertilizers do you use, but every site is going to be different. What you need to do is going to be unique to your site. So get that soil test done. The problem that we had on our farm was that our ground is incredibly unlevel. We live on a mountain. And I knew we could do this after seeing these farms in Ecuador. And so I said, well, we can build terraces, and while we're building these terraces, we can backfill them with beautiful soil that we create. And so that's exactly what we did. Here in Kentucky, you can use contour plowing, which is another thing you can do on unlevel ground. But unfortunately for us, we are too unlevel for contour plowing. And that picture up there on the left, that kind of looks like level ground, but there's actually a 15-foot drop in elevation between where I'm standing and where that little shed is down there at the bottom of the hill. And so we've been able to create that beautiful level ground, and it looks flat, but at each one of those sets of blocks, there's a drop and a little wall after that. And so it's been really powerful for us to be able to build these beautiful soils. Another thing that we had a problem with was we had super wet areas. We bought our property in a drought. Oops. And we were assured by the previous owner that it was a dry piece of property. And as you can see in those other pictures, it's not. And so we had to lift a lot of growing spaces up and out of the water by building raised beds. Luckily, when we realized this, we weren't farming for a living at that point in time, so we could take our time installing drainage and figuring out how to manage the heavy rains that we have. It's not unusual to get 2 inches of rain in a day in the mountains around the Smokies, and so we have to really deal with a lot of water moving across the surface of the ground, and we have to help it get to where it's trying to go, as well as help it with infiltration getting into the soil. And so we installed a lot of drainage to handle that heavy rain. And another thing that we did was we put in a massive composting operation. I love to compost. I know it sounds kind of crazy because it's stinky and it's kind of gross, but it's really, really fun. We actually have a friend who has a brewery in Asheville. We're really lucky to live right there by Beer City, USA. And so there's tons of beer grain coming out of Asheville. And we use that. We use coffee grounds. We've got friends with coffee shops. And then we have a woodworker down the hill that has got kiln-dried hardwoods. And so we get sawdust from him and use that for litter in our chicken house. And then the chickens add beautiful nitrogenous waste to that. And we're able to mix that with our farm waste and put that all together to make absolutely gorgeous soils that make agricultural extension agents squeal when they come onto our farm. And I was really proud of that when that happened. I was like, all right, we've made it. Yeah. The agricultural extension agent thinks my soil is beautiful. And sustainability is a really huge thing for us. And so we really felt this was a powerful way for us to reduce waste in our community. A lot of organic material goes into landfill, and that all turns into methane gas. As you guys know, that is even more powerful than carbon dioxide. And so by getting those wastes and composting those wastes, you can do a really powerful thing. You can really help fight global climate change as a farmer by locking carbon up into your soils as well as getting that methane out of our atmosphere. And when you do composting on scale, you can be lazy about it, which I think is really fun. You know, if you've got a small pile and you're really trying to produce a lot of compost, you got to really turn that and just really work hard at it. But if you've got a giant pile and you're making like 3 to 4 dump truck loads of compost a year, you know, you can be a lot more chill about that. So we are lazy composters. As I said, you know, good soil really is the most important component of a farm, and the best way to do that is to partner with your microbes. Feeding those microbes organic material is going to keep them happy, and it's going to allow for a really diverse microbial ecosystem inside of your soils. And high organic matter also helps with moisture issues. Organic matter can hold water in your soils as well as create soil texture, which allows for good soil drainage. So if you've got a lot of clay in your soil, that organic matter is really going to help out with that. You know, a lot of people always say, oh, if you've got really clay soil and you need drainage, add sand. And I'm like, oh, you know what happens when you mix sand and clay? That makes bricks. So don't do that. Add organic material. And every time we plant, we imitate the duff layer. And so we actually spread compost on our soil every single time we plant. And so this is just feeding our little babies and our little roommates all the time. And another thing we've done is we've tried really hard to establish high variety in our soil ecosystem. So we do low-till and no-till farming. And this allows for fungi and macroinvertebrates to establish in your soil. The more you till, the more you chop your roommates into tiny little pieces. And you're going to end up with a soil ecosystem that's really based on bacterial community. But if you reduce your tillage as much as you possibly can, and we do till a little bit with just a rototiller to incorporate stuff when we very first put our terraces in. But after about 2 or 3 years, the most we till it, we've got this little electric Sunjo tiller that everybody makes fun of us because it looks like something that like your grandma's doing her little flower bed with. That's what we use to till our entire farm. We just use it to incorporate a little bit of nutrients if we need to add nutrients into a bed, but a lot of times we're not even adding any fertilizer to our beds because there's enough fertilizer because this microbial community is breaking down that organic material and it's taking all of those locked up nutrients and making them into something that the plants can consume. And you can inoculate your soils with beneficials. I highly recommend doing that. If you don't have them present, you know, you can get them and bring them to your farm. You can order mycorrhizal fungi, you can order nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and you can put all of that stuff into your soils and you can jumpstart them. You can also inoculate your soils with things that help with pest control. We've put a lot of beneficial nematodes into our soils because we had a lot of insect pests that had larvae that were overwintering in the soil, things like cucumber beetles. If anybody out here grows squash and cucumbers, you guys all, I see some heads shaking. Oh yeah, we hate those guys. Well, their larvae are in the soil, and they're beneficial nematodes that will eat those baby beetles, and you can put those in your soils. And then once you actually develop this beautiful system and you're not chopping stuff up, they're there. And so when those beetles are laying their eggs and their larvae are hatching out, those nematodes are just waiting to eat those guys. And so it can be really helpful for you to have a really healthy ecosystem in your soil. Our mycorrhiza are so healthy that we'll have mushroom flushes in the middle of our farm fields where we'll actually have mushrooms that'll pop up out of the soil. And sometimes it freaks people out that don't know about ecology. They're like, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to let them grow. And then they die after a couple of days, and then they turn into amazing soil. And they don't hurt any of the plants. All they're doing is providing nutrients. So we have some really steep ground on our farm, stuff that's way too steep for soil disturbance. And so what we've done in those areas is we have planted perennials. And I highly recommend, that if you are a real small farmer and you're looking to try to maximize your income, plant some fruit. Every time we take fruit to the farmer's market, it is gone instantly off of our table, instantly. We grow blueberries, apple trees, pawpaws, and raspberries on our farm. It was really fun because we kind of brought pawpaws to our community. Being a Kentucky and West Virginia girl, I love pawpaws. This is the land of the pawpaw. And we went down to Western North Carolina, and people were like, oh, what? And I was like, oh, my goodness. And so I actually started growing the trees from seed, and I have sold hundreds of pawpaw trees now to people who live down there. So I'm so excited. I'm slowly but surely inoculating Western North Carolina with pawpaws, which I think the bears will probably be very happy about that. I'm sure the forests will also be full of them soon as well. And when you're figuring out which fruits to grow, I highly recommend you research your varieties. Talk to your agricultural extension agent. This is when your extension can be so valuable because they can tell you which varieties grow best there. We had so many failures trying to grow stone crop fruits, cherries, plums, peaches on our farm, and they just had brown rot problems. And being an organic farmer, we went to extension and they were like, oh yeah, well that's just what happens to those guys. Hose them down with Captan. And I was like, I'm not hosing anything down with Captan on my farm. But so we realized we just had to cut all those trees down because they were never going to do anything. They were going to be more work. And so sometimes you're going to have failures as a farmer, especially as an organic farmer. Don't be afraid to say, oops, I shouldn't have done that and cut that tree down, or oops, that crop didn't work out and turn that under. It's going to happen, but just realize that that's part of the journey, and you'll be a better farmer for it when you make those mistakes. Another thing to think about is planting fruits that have different harvest windows, because fruits are a lot of work. When it comes time for fruits to be ripe, it is time to pick them, and you've got to store them properly, and you've got to move them. And so that's one of the reasons we grow lots of different things. Apples traditionally were grown in Western North Carolina because we had a really crummy road system, and it was hard for people to transport fruits. And apples keep really well. So that's a nice crop for that. But if you want to do raspberries and pawpaws and blueberries, making sure to spread your stuff out is going to be really helpful. One thing to think about when you're an organic farmer is you really can't beat nature. I know that it's kind of one of the mantras of mankind to subdue and conquer nature. It's just part of how Western culture has always seen the natural world, but you can't. And so you really need to farm like an ecologist. I did not have any formal agricultural training at all when we started farming. So I just set up my farm like a giant science experiment. I just used my knowledge that I had about ecology to set all of our systems into place. And it has ended up being a huge benefit. Obviously, later I went and gained more agricultural knowledge, but having that ecological foundation has been huge for us. Understanding your local cycles, the weather patterns, and the microclimates that are on your farm will help you to make wise decisions about crop placement and structural placement. Do things like watching where the sun lies. We actually put a greenhouse in one spot that we thought would be really great, and then we realized that it was on the north side of the mountain in front of our house, and there was so little sunlight on that caterpillar tunnel that it was actually colder inside the caterpillar tunnel than it was outside on a lot of days. And we were like, oops, that was not the right place. We had an excellent crop of chickweed growing in there, which in Asheville I was able to market to a bunch of hippies to use for some stuff. So it did work out okay. But that was not the intended crop in that little caterpillar tunnel. Another thing to think about is be ready for what climate change is throwing at farmers. We are living in a really unusual time where our ecosystems are changing. We're starting to see more intense rainstorms. We're starting to see more drought and flooding. And so really plan for climate catastrophes. We actually had a climate catastrophe on our farm a little bit more than 2 years ago. We got hit with Tropical Storm Fred. There were actually almost 30 people that died in our county when Tropical Storm Fred came through. Our entire town, the center of town, actually went underwater. The river jumped up so fast, it was really crazy. We got 9 inches of rain in 2 hours at our house, but there were some places in our county that were south of us that got 24 inches of rain in 2 hours. It was nuts. Like the whole community was just washed away. The local farm store, my husband called after it stopped raining at our house and asked if we needed to come down there and help him. And he was like, oh no, the river, it's just barely below and it stopped raining, so everything's okay. And he didn't realize it was raining at the headwaters. And next thing we knew, there was 6 feet of water inside the farm store. And luckily the neighbors were able to come down and they saved the chickens and the goats that he has in the little yard for the kids to pet while everybody is shopping for their farm supplies. But one thing that did help, even though our creek got destroyed, you can see in that top picture, that's a bridge that's usually 3 feet above the actual creek, but it got buried under rock. And that ditch right there that you can see, we had to dig a hole to get to the culvert and lay an old piece of guttering to catch the water so it didn't wash our driveway. That's like 6 feet of gravel from the road that got dumped in that. But our terraces and our water-wise design on our farm, as well as our perennial crops and our deep-rooted plantings, protected our topsoil. So we actually had very little soil loss out of our planting areas. And we had a lot of crop loss just because that massive amount of rain just caused the plants to just get waterlogged and die. But we just had to pull those dead plants out and we were able to replant immediately. And so there were some farms that lost a lot more than we did. We were really, really lucky. Another thing that's really important is growing the right stuff. Every farm has got a really unique ecosystem, and so you're going to have a unique plant selection. I recommend that you think about this as a science experiment. Test different varieties and determine which ones work best for your farm. You're going to be collecting data, and then next year you're going to collect data. And the following year, you're going to collect data. We've been doing this for a decade now, and we're still collecting data and changing up the varieties that we grow. And luckily, a lot of these seed companies, they're improving varieties all the time. And so you've always got something new that sounds like it might work. Grab a seed packet and try a few of those guys out. You might find something that's amazing for your farm. Local heirlooms are really invaluable in this situation. We were really fortunate to be gifted a green bean from one of our local farmers that's been grown in our county for hundreds of years. And we are actually the keepers of this bean now. As far as we know, other than the people that we've shared it with, we're the only ones that are keeping this green bean variety. And so it's amazing. It doesn't get disease, it needs almost no care, and it produces 2 different harvests of green beans off the same plants during the year. So for a small farmer, that's like amazing. I can just plant those guys and forget about them. I don't have to even worry about anything. And so talk to the old-timey farmers around where you're at and try to get a hold of those old seed varieties. And using good seed companies is really important as well. We love Johnny's seeds. They actually saved our butts during COVID. Everybody panicked and started buying seeds like crazy. I don't know if anybody else was trying to buy seeds during that time, but like all of a sudden all the seed companies were sold out. And Johnny's actually stopped selling to anybody who didn't have a commercial account to save farmers, because all of a sudden, like, you know, Mr. Smith that was panicked was buying like thousands of lettuce seeds to stick them under his bed because he was afraid the world was going to end. And it's like, but the farmers need lettuce seeds or you're going to starve, homie. So, you know, Johnny's was like, we're not going to sell anything to anybody who's not an actual farmer. And so they saved tons of farmers, but their varieties are amazing. And good seed companies are going to tell you what environments seeds grow well in, as well as different characteristics and different diseases that you have to deal with. You know, we do grow a lot of hybrids on our farm. I know heirlooms are the hot thing, but if you are a really small farm and you're trying to make a living, you know, you've got to grow some hybrid crops. You know, we don't grow anything that's genetically modified on our farm, but you do need to make sure that you're getting the most productive stuff. You know, if you can grow an heirloom and it is really productive, you know, there are some heirlooms that we do grow because they're amazing and they're perfect for our environment. But remember, all those heirlooms exist because they were perfect for the place where those people were growing them. You know, and so if you can find that perfect one, that's awesome. But otherwise, you know, you might not be able to grow as many heirlooms as you'd like to. Something that's really important for a small farm, and really for all farms, is making sure to rotate your crops and schedule your crops really well. You really need to keep plants in the ground. Your soil fungal partners don't like it when there's not something growing in your soil. They will die pretty fast. It's pretty amazing how quickly mycorrhizal fungi will end up just drying up on you if they don't have their little roommates in there to hang out with. And so we really try to keep our farm productive. Remember as well that bare soil is not making you any money, and bare soil can wash away. And so, you know, either have crops in the ground or use a cover crop, or even gentle weeds, I feel like, are better than bare soil. And you can see right here in this picture, like, I'm pulling stuff out, and you can see I've pulled everything out behind me, and we're getting ready to plant new stuff immediately. And a lot of times people are like, well, how do you get away with that? You know, you don't let your beds rest. But because we're constantly feeding our soil compost, and we have such a thriving ecological community on our farm, we're able to do production all the time. And we do our soil tests, and they're good. We're not damaging our soil ecosystem. So if you can really get your farm to the point where you've got that incredible soil, you can produce year-round and have your beds always making food. It's just important to schedule a good crop rotation. Not only does the good crop rotation discourage diseases, but it's really good for managing your nutrients. You know, if you have a heavy feeder like tomatoes, we grow a lot of garlic, and a lot of people don't realize how heavy of a feeder garlic is. But then you don't want to follow that crop up with another really hungry crop. You know, find something that doesn't use quite as many nutrients, allow that compost to break down and your soil community to rebuild that nutrient reservoir, and then come back with another hungry crop in another couple of years. It's really good to understand the diseases that your different crop guilds are going to suffer from in your environment, and know what your rotational schedule could be. If you need to rotate every 2 years or every 4 years. And that's another place where your agricultural extension agent can be really helpful. Another thing is to know the life cycle of your pests. Where do those guys overwinter? Where are they spending their time off? Don't leave reservoirs on your farm for pests and diseases. Sanitation is really important. I see a lot of farms where they just leave the dead stuff on the ground. They leave all their growing structures on the ground. They've got row covers just covered in mud laying on the ground. And that's not a good idea, because that's just asking your pests to overwinter in your garden. Clean everything up, pull it all out. It's a little bit of extra work, but an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of the cure. There's a reason that they say that. On our farm, we mimic natural systems. And so we mulch with organics. We don't use plastic mulches on our farm. And I'm not poo-pooing anybody who does use plastic mulches. I understand that if you've got a really big farm, plastic mulches are really necessary. But, you know, our farm is small enough that we can handle it without doing anything like that. So we primarily use a lot of composted just hardwood mulch on our farm. We'll cut it up with the mulch machine, and then we'll set it aside. We'll let it break down for a year or two, and then we just put that stuff directly onto our beds after our long-lived crops get established. We layer our crops and we schedule to interplant our transitions. We don't do hardly anything from seed in the ground on our farm. We start everything in transplants, so we don't have to wait for that seed to germinate in the ground and then start to get going. We're putting a plant that's already ready to rock and roll in the soil, and so that makes the turnover for that crop much, much faster. You can save yourself 3 to 6 weeks, depending upon what you're growing, by putting a transplant into the ground versus putting a seed into the ground. And so you can see in this picture right here, we're planting our tomato plants directly in with our spring chard and our mustards and our lettuces. And so you can see, and in the other picture, you can see we've got beets and we've got kales, and we're coming in and putting the row of tomatoes right beside it there in our caterpillar tunnel. And so we'll have winter lettuce, we'll remove those heads and plant our tomatoes and peppers with our spring lettuces around it. And then once those are established, we'll remove those greens, and then we'll plant our summer lettuces. And then we fight late blight really, really bad in western North Carolina. It's a major problem where we live. And so by the time we need to start spraying our crops with oxidate or sanidate, lettuces don't really like getting sprinkled with that. It has a tendency to burn their leaves a little bit. So we'll come back in with herbs or some kind of a flower or something else. Quick Asian greens are something we love on our farm. I don't know if you guys like to grow bok choy, tatsoys, all those things. They're amazing, and they have such a quick turnover, and they're really delicious. They're super nutrient-dense food. And I highly recommend you try those things out. And it may take a little while to get your community used to eating those. When we very first started taking them to the farmers market in Haywood County in North Carolina, people were like, "What's that?" And so we gave people recipes for those things. And anytime you try something new or different, shamelessly plug your product with recipes. See if you can find a nonprofit group that has recipe cards they'll give you, or put recipes on your website or your social media. Get people excited about cooking with the stuff, and then they'll get excited about eating it after they realize how delicious it is. We do some companion planting. We have found that companion planting is not as magical as some folks claim it to be. I'll see all these books, and if you plant this with this, it will keep these plants from getting diseases. We have never found that to be the case. I'm not saying that it's not, it might be, but we've not been able to benefit from any of that kind of thing. But what we have been able to benefit from companion planting with is pollination, as well as pest control. And so things with flowers are going to attract your pollinators to your garden, and things that your beneficial insects are going to bring those beneficials into the garden. And so interplanting with things that are going to draw insects into your garden, that's a really powerful thing that you can do with companion planting. So we do a lot of aromatic herbs and flowers. I do teas on our farm, and so I grow a lot of the tea plants as companion plants. And it's really great when you do companion planting, because you can have small plantings of things that you can put in your CSA boxes. And if you just offer something fun to your CSA clients 1 or 2 times a year, they get really excited about that, and it can help to break up the monotony of your spring vegetables or your summer vegetables when everybody's just like, "Oh my gosh, if I see another yellow squash, I'm going to throw it at somebody," And, if you're throwing them a tea bundle or an herb bundle in there, it makes things really nice for them. Another thing that's really, really important when you're growing organically, and especially when you have a really small farm and you can't afford losses, is to keep your farm healthy. And so one of the things that I think is one of the most powerful ecological things that I brought to our farm was the idea of integrated pest management. I remember the first time I went to a talk about this at an agricultural conference, I was like, "Oh, I'm already doing this. This is so exciting." Because it's basically just applying the idea of ecology to managing your pests. And the first thing is be a nerd about your pests. You need to know what they are, what they look like, what they're doing, where they're going to be, and then just spend time monitoring your farm and looking for those guys. I love going for a walk in the morning with a cup of coffee, and I'm looking for bugs. And at first, you're just going to kind of, manage things loosely. You're going to do a lot of manual removal, so hold your coffee in your left hand, squish the bugs with your right hand. Try not to switch your hands up unless you like bug-flavored coffee. But that really helps you to stay on top of your stuff. And monitor day and night. We grow lettuce, lots and lots of lettuce and greens, and so slugs are a real problem when you grow greens. And slugs are primarily active at night, and there's a lot of pests that are active at night. And so we'll have a couple of beers, we'll grab some buckets, and we'll go out and we'll have a slug picking contest. And it's kind of fun, whoever picks the most slugs is the one that gets the back rub that night. You can make it into a little contest and have a good time with it. We'll have friends that'll come over and pick slugs with us after having a couple of beers. It's amazing how much fun something like that can be to people who don't live on a farm. And everybody's kind of like, what? But yeah, I bet you that you will be surprised. Invite your friends over for that, and have prizes. Know how to discourage infection on your farm. Using things like insect netting is really powerful, just keeping the bugs off of your plants. Encouraging predators on your farms, and encouraging airflow to help prevent fungal diseases. Making sure to prune your crops so that airflow can get through there. And only use sprays when damage to your crop is imminent. I know a lot of people who panic, they'll see like one aphid and they'll spray their crops. And it's like, the predatory insects can't find those guys if you don't allow them to be there in low numbers. And so allow your ecosystem and trust your ecosystem to help balance those guys out. Just smush them with your fingers and kind of let it go. And make sure to use the mildest products first. Don't, come out with your guns blazing at the very beginning. Try to use products that are just going to be real gentle. That way you're not hurting your pollinators and you're not hurting your predatory insects. And alternate your products to prevent resistance. Remember that an insect life cycle is very short, and these guys can evolve resistance to products really easily. And when you are an organic farmer, we don't have as many tools in the toolbox as I'm sure all of us would wish that we did. And so if you get your pests to where suddenly they're resistant to one of your sprays, then you've just reduced the number of tools in your toolbox, and that can be dangerous. And then if all else fails, sell your problems. I have people that tell me all the time how great, cabbage looper eggs taste on my kale, because I know they're on there. And I just sell it when the cabbage loopers start to get crazy. I know there's eggs all over those bad boys. I yank them and just get rid of it, So, realize that you can market baby heads. Realize that you can chop something up and put it into a mix. If something's not working out, just get rid of it and start again. Don't be afraid to just try to go ahead and sell it now before things get really bad. Another thing that I do is I plant a lot of pollinator gardens on our farm. They're beautiful. That's a picture of one of our gardens that's along flower beds that's alongside our gardens. And I don't do these for cut flowers. I just do these for our pollinators. They're mostly native plants. Using those native plants is going to provide a refuge for all those predatory insects. It gives them a place where they can complete their life cycle, where they're not being constantly disturbed. So I highly recommend you do as many native plantings with flowering things that you can around your farm, just to increase your biodiversity, because that biodiversity is going to establish that healthy ecosystem that's going to make sure that your farm flourishes. Another thing you can do is making your imperfections advantages. Incline is a problem that we have on our farm, but an incline in elevation can actually increase the inception of sunlight onto your soil surface. And a 5% or a 5-degree incline actually can throw you into a warmer growing zone. I couldn't believe that. I read that in an Elliot Coleman book. I was like, bingo. It's really cold at our house at 3,600 feet in elevation. Our friends that have farms down in the valley come up to our house and they're like, whoa, I didn't bring a heavy enough jacket to walk around your farm today. But we have oriented all of our terraces to the south or the southwest. And so those are all absorbing solar radiation, and it's heating our soil. And so we're actually productive, and we've got lettuce plants that are flourishing when our friends that are down in the valley don't, because they've lost their crops because it's gotten too cold. Another thing is berms and walls and your tunnels can absorb heat. That bottom picture is our plant starts greenhouse. And so that wall is what separates, you saw in the picture earlier, my husband was using that wall as a support for one of our planting tables. But right now, we've got our lettuces and our choys inside there. You can see our row covers right there. And that sun that's facing directly southwest beats on that block wall and warms it up, and that greenhouse will consistently be 5 to 10 degrees warmer than all of the rest of our greenhouses, even though it gets less sunlight during the daytime, because that late solar radiation really warms that entire level. That whole second tier of that greenhouse gets warmed because the sun's beating on that block wall. Another thing that we've been able to take advantage of is the high water table in our tunnels. The more watering you do, the more evaporation you have, and you can have moisture issues. But if you can actually get your beds high enough above the water level so your roots don't rot, you can actually get away with watering your crops a lot less. And a lot of times the most fertile soils are these beautiful alluvial soils that are near creeks and near rivers, and the water table is kind of high. So if you can actually create a situation where you get your crops up and out of that water table, having access to the water table and those lower roots can save you a ton of time and actually help to make your farm more resilient during drought. So we've got this teeny tiny farm, and we realized I had to leave my job, and we were like, oh God, we do not make enough money off of this farm for me to leave my job. What are we gonna do? And we were like, where are we gonna grow? And we had applied all of these ecological practices, and we had increased the productivity of our farm hugely, but it still wasn't enough. And then all of a sudden it dawned on us that where is the same as when? We had a bunch of areas of our farm that we weren't growing during the late fall and the winter and the really early spring. And so all that space was just being unused. And if we started growing year round in those spaces, it was the same thing as doubling the size of our farm during the regular growing season. And we were like, wait a minute. And then we also realized that there weren't a lot of farmers that were growing in the off season where we were. Right now, we take our products to Asheville, to the farmer's market. Most of the farmer's markets in Asheville, you have to kill somebody to get into one of those farmer's markets because those farms have been there forever, and they're the big farms that have the names, and everybody wants to buy the stuff. Come May, we can't sell our produce there anymore because everybody goes to them to get their stuff. We get kicked out of the market because they're back. But in the wintertime, we're taking a whole truckload of produce on Saturdays, and we are sold out within an hour and a half. So if you can produce stuff this time of year, people will buy it. People are hungry for fresh produce in February and January and this time of year. So I really highly recommend the idea of growing year round. And so we started just growing with low tunnels outside. We actually started doing this back before there were a lot of the caterpillar tunnels, and people weren't really talking about this stuff. It wasn't as trendy. The only people we knew that had what I would consider a caterpillar tunnel were people that were doing their tobacco starts in them, and so we have a double tunnel design. We'll show you a picture of that, and I'll show you a picture in a future slide. It's got a smaller tunnel that's down low with just a little wire, and then the top tunnel is actually made with electrical conduit that you can just buy either from an electrical surplus store, or you can even get it at Lowe's, and then make your own bender, and you can bend those bad boys for real cheap. We use clips and ties to attach these guys to what's called a purlin, which is going to be a piece that's going to go across the top of your tunnels. I see a lot of these places marketing what they're calling low cats, and they're these little flimsy wires, and there's no purlin on top of them. And I'm like, oh man, you get like 2 inches of snow on that thing. That's going to crush your crops. And so make sure if you're growing year round and you're legit doing it, that you've got something that can handle wind and can handle snow and can handle ice. I remember in Kentucky, I remember the ice. We don't have so much ice in western North Carolina. I'm really thankful for that. I'm sorry, guys. I don't miss it. And get a lot of weights to hold down those covers. You can see in that picture with the snow, I've got a concrete block for one of our weights. I don't recommend using things with corners. That's not been very successful for us. When the wind blows, those corners will tear holes in your covers. And so we just got bags that we fill with sand or river gravel, and we have those guys set outside. And on these low tunnels, only use plastic when you really need to, just when you've got extreme wind and temperatures during the real rough part of the year. That plastic's gonna trap a lot of moisture, and you're gonna get real high humidity underneath it. So try as much as you can to not have plastic on your low tunnels. It may not be as much of a problem for you as it is for us. Where we are, it's like it's a temperate rainforest. So you've gotta manage humidity like you would manage like everything that's important for your survival. So after we did these low tunnels, we realized like, hey, we can do this, but we were spending a lot of time on harvest day on our hands and knees in the snow with a snowy cover on our backs, and we were having to change our clothes like 3 or 4 times on harvest day because we were disgusting. And so we invested in some caterpillar tunnels. We got these actually through the High Tunnel Initiative grant in our CS. That's a really great program. I highly recommend you guys take advantage of that. You get your tunnels, you put them in, you start growing in them, and then they reimburse you per square foot. And we actually got our tunnels pretty much paid for, so it was really fabulous as a small farmer without a lot of extra money. We made that investment, but then that money came right back into our bank account, and so we were only sweating for a little while, seeing how low that bank account number was. And so these caterpillar tunnels are great because they create a dry place for your low tunnels. This is a picture during the summertime, but I'll show you some wintertime pictures here soon. You've got a lot less mud on harvest day. I love it because you can still work in the rain, and it rains a lot where we live, so I don't have to worry about, oh, it's a rainy day, I can't do any work on the farm. I can go out there and plant and weed and harvest and do everything I want to do underneath those caterpillar tunnels. It's going to provide protection from the elements during the winter and the summer, and for us it gives us the ability to plant a lot earlier and later, which is huge because our growing season is short. Our last frost date sometime is at the end of May, and we've actually had killing frosts like the very last weekend of May before at our house, and so you've got to be really careful about planting out. And this is great for cucurbits, for squashes and cucumbers. We can do 4 successional plantings of them, doing the first and last ones inside of our tunnels and then the middle 2 out in the terraces. These things are really easy to construct. They're built to just throw up, and they're built to be able to move them around. I mentioned that we had that one that we placed in the wrong location. Wasn't any big deal. We actually took half of it away and moved it to a better spot and thought, well, maybe just the front half of it will be okay. And so then we tried growing in the front half, and it was, again, not enough sunlight. So, oops, should have learned that lesson the first time. And so this winter we moved it to a much better spot. And it's nice too because if you're doing crop rotation and you only have like 100 or 200 feet of this tunnel, you can move it around the farm, you can chase your tomatoes or whatever it is that you're wanting to use this for rotation on. In the summertime, it's really powerful because we grow lettuce year-round on our farm. And this is going to create a shade cloth. Actually, that top picture, that's not plastic on that. That's actually a 30% shade cloth that we're using to protect our lettuce. You can also use it for insect netting, for exclusionary device, and so that's a really good thing to do. Because we're a small farm, we do a lot of vertical growing, and so it provides us a nice structure for our vertical trellises. So we've got beans and squash and cucumbers and tomatoes that are growing on these structures, so they're really nice to use for that. They're real sturdy. We have a lot of high winds at our place, and just like you guys do here, and so it's nice to have a strong structure that's holding your crops up. Another thing that is really powerful for these guys, and I think in the face of climate change, you guys are going to see a lot more of this, but I feel like now the rain at our house, it's just like someone just turned a bucket over, and it just comes. And it beats the crap out of your stuff. And all of a sudden you look out at your field of greens and it's coleslaw. You don't have anything that's marketable. And so putting these shade cloths over top of your greens is nice because that also acts to break the rain up. And so it's not beating the living daylights out of your green. It actually turns that rain into this beautiful mist that just gently waters your crops and doesn't turn them into mush. And this can be done on low tunnels as well. You can see those pictures. We've got the shade cloth and we're exclusionary netting over top of those low tunnels next to it as well. But you can see how steep our property is. These are our top tunnels, and you can see the next tunnel is way down there, and our front bed's right there. You can see that elevation change happen in there. I'm not holding the camera sideways in any of these pictures. This is actually how our farm is set up. So don't be afraid of a little bit of an incline when you're setting up these tunnels. You can definitely do it. You just cut one side of them a little bit shorter, and you can buy little extensions too, and you can just put the extensions on one side and not put them on the other. Just remember when you're putting your plastic on that it's going to be shorter. Don't tell me how I know to remember to do that. Our high tunnel is actually in the middle of our farm. This is a much sturdier structure. It's not like a caterpillar tunnel. It's a permanent structure. And I love our high tunnel. It's my favorite place to be in the wintertime. I mean, if you don't want to grow for any other reason, grow because you will never have seasonal depression ever again. Because you walk in there, and I mean, look at that. Like, it just makes me so happy going in there. I took these pictures just a couple weeks ago. Like, this is what the tunnels look like right now. We went through, it got down to 2 degrees at our house last week, you know, and this is still what they look like right now. You know, we put this in the best real estate on our farm. A lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to put it in a greenhouse. We'll put it somewhere crappy, you know. No, don't do that. You're marrying the structure, and you're going to be growing in there year-round, so put it in the best spot possible. That way you can assure that you're getting good sun, it's going to keep it warm, and you've got good soil, because you want to make sure you can do your thing in there. We've got a large single bed in our high tunnel, and then we've got a permanent walkway. You can kind of see it on the side over there where those concrete blocks are. There's a walkway that we can push a wheelbarrow up, and then there's one more growing bed on the other side of that. So we've got 4 3.5-foot rows. I know most farms do 3-foot rows, but we're like, I mean, as you can probably guess, we're not the sanest farmers, and we've got small spaces, so we do 3.5-foot rows. It's probably not the best thing for our backs. When we get older, we've discussed about how we will make our row sizes smaller, but while we're still young enough to do enough yoga, we're gonna stretch a little further, and we're gonna have tinier rows. It's just wide enough for us to walk through there. And we have an overhead watering system in here, as well as drip irrigation set up for when we do tomatoes in here. And so in the summertime, this is an amazing structure for us. The first talk I went to today, they were talking about putting shade cloth on their tunnel because it gets too hot in the summer. I was like, wow, that's such a crazy concept for me, because it gets down into the low to mid 40s at night at my house. So we actually struggle with growing tomatoes and peppers at our house. It can be really hard to get your peppers to turn color where we live. And so this gives me the heat that I need to provide a really great, healthy space for my tomatoes and for my peppers. We also grow tomatoes kind of crazy. We just let them grow kind of wild. I see everybody else with these really beautiful, you know, single runners, or they do the 2-split thing. We just spread them out and let them go crazy. We do prune them a lot. We make sure we've got, you know, just one good layer. You know, there's a lot of airflow going through there, but we really give our tomatoes some freedom to spread out, and that works really, really well for us. And so we need good structural support for trellising. So we love our tunnels for that, because we can hang our trellises from that. We actually use the cattle panel is what we use for hanging our tomato plants on. We actually just put them on fencing and then hang them up high. And we let our tomatoes grow to be about 7 or 8 feet tall inside these tunnels. It's beautiful for us because, like I said, we can get our stuff in the ground in April. We usually don't plant until the very last weekend in May or the first weekend in June outside for our tomatoes. So it's hard to compete at market when everybody else has already had tomatoes for a month. People just walk right past your booth because they don't think you've got tomatoes. Even when you set them out, people get this real one-track mind at the market, and they know where they're going. They know what booth they want to go to. And so getting them out there when everybody else is getting them out there is really important. And the thing that's really awesome for us is because we have this amazing ecological system and we really stay on top of our stuff, as well as doing lots of layered planting. In this picture right here, you can kind of see there's a little debris at the base of these tomatoes. We had just pulled out our summer lettuces and we're getting ready to plant in some new stuff. We've always got something growing down low, and so we actually can come in under our tomatoes and start planting our fall crops in underneath them, and then I just cut the stem off and we just lay down more compost every time we plant, and so we just keep going. And so we can leave our tomatoes going, and we let them go all the way into late October, and our peppers will go all the way into early November. And there are no peppers and tomatoes at market during that time. And so every single one we take to the farmer's market is guaranteed to sell. We never bring home any of those late tomatoes and peppers. And for us, financially, it is so worth it. You've really got to keep your plants healthy, and you've really got to have that vibrant soil to be able to pull that off, because tomatoes are heavy feeders, and they'll zap your your ground. They'll really suck those nutrients out. So really just consistently putting down compost every time we do that rotation underneath them and really keeping those microbes happy. And then we also do foliar applications of Serenade, which is a really beautiful beneficial soil microbes that you're spraying on your plants, as well as compost tea that we make from our compost to keep them really happy and really rocking out. In the wintertime, we actually use covers to keep our crops warm. It's a common misconception that your greenhouse, an unheated greenhouse, is going to keep your crops warm. But your unheated greenhouse is only going to be like 5, maybe 10 if you're lucky, degrees warmer than it is outside. Sometimes it's the exact same temperature as outside by the time the morning hours hit. So your real heat is coming from the fact that it's warmer during the day, it's trapping that sunlight, and it's storing that solar heat in your soil. And then you put blankies over top of your crops, and you tuck them in every night, and you say, good night, sweet dreams. And so be ready if you're going to do winter growing, because every morning you got to come untuck everybody and say good morning, and then every night you got to go back. It's so funny. Our friends are like, oh, you guys can come and visit us in this far and distant place in the wintertime because you have time off, right? And we're like, no. Like, sometimes we're spending like 4 hours covering and uncovering crops. But it's totally worth it because we're getting paid to do it, because everything we're growing is selling like hotcakes at the market. And you want to keep your covers as close to your crops as you can. And so we do one layer when it's just right around freezing temperatures to keep the frost off of them. And so you can see that bottom layer, it's just like a little wire hoop that we made just out of the same wire that you use for fencing. And then the second layer that's over top of that electrical conduit, you don't have to have purlins inside your greenhouse because these guys are never going to be facing wind. They're not going to be underneath the snow. The snow is going to be on the outside of your greenhouse. And as you can see in that picture, if you live somewhere where you get a lot of snow, be ready to clear some snow off those greenhouses. We actually had a greenhouse collapse because we got a freak 8 inches of snow that wasn't even supposed to be snow, and woke up and one of the greenhouses didn't quite look right. And then we realized that, that's because it's not a greenhouse anymore. It's a modern art piece. And it was totally crushed, and we had to very quickly rebuild it. And so, be ready to clear them off. But a little bit of snow is great because it does provide insulation. And so if you're only going to get 1 inch, or depending on your structure, maybe 2 inches, you can leave that on there for that insulation. When you're going to get down to 20 degrees and below, we actually do 3 layers of cover. So we've got these 2 layers you can see here, and then we've got a great big cover that goes over top of the whole deal. It's like 25 feet wide. And that one's really nice sometimes when you're like, maybe it's going to get cold enough to cover, maybe not, because you can just take the whole thing up and over real quick just to keep a frost off. And then when it's going to get down into like single digits or 0 or below 0, we'll add water reservoirs under there. You can see that's like an old kitty litter container. We just fill those things full of water, and then during the daytime they absorb heat. And then at night, those things act as a little heat reservoir. That's in our dome greenhouse. We actually have 900 gallons of water. We've got 2 big 300-gallon tanks and then a 300-gallon horse trough in there. And that thing never gets below freezing. Like I said, we've got avocados and pomegranates and lemon trees growing in that structure. So water is an amazing way to passively store that heat. Just remember, you want closed containers, because if they're open, they're going to add humidity to your space, and you don't really want to do that. One thing to take into consideration when you're planting in the winter is it's not like when you're planting the rest of the year. Your winter starts, you want to harden your plants off. You're going to start them inside, you're going to grow them really fast, and you're going to get strong roots, and then you're going to put them in a transition area and then put them out under your tunnels. And take care to manage your moisture, because that's a big issue. And remember the Persephone period. You've only got 10 hours of daylight or less. They're not going to grow real vigorously, so you got to get guys in the ground before that. And you've got a lot of challenges, pests and diseases. You're creating a refuge for these guys, so stay on top of your spray schedule and open your tunnel when you can. High humidity encourages foliar disease, and so you want to have vents and fans. And remember, wind is going to turn this thing into a giant kite, so make sure to secure your tunnel. That way, when the wind comes, you're not going to your neighbor's house to collect your greenhouse. Forecasting can give you a false sense of security. Don't gamble with your temperatures. If you've got a crop you want to market in just like a week or two, make sure to cover it. Sometimes they'll say, oh, it's only going to get down to 32 degrees, and you look outside and it's 27. And then you've got frost on your lettuce, and now your lettuce has little spots on it, and it's going to take it a week to get over that. And heat is a problem in the winter. Remember, these guys are going to turn into little ovens when the sun comes out. So open those doors, install emergency vents, and be ready to open those tunnels on a schedule. And the best way to keep up with that is to have a monitoring system. And so pay attention to what's going on with that. Weeds are an issue. Make sure to stay on top of them. Have a weeding schedule. And fertility can be tough as well. So don't over-fertilize. A lot of times compost can be enough. And salts can become an issue if you over-fertilize. So be really cautious to look for that. And so practical advice for you guys, build your skills. Take classes. Farmers used to do everything themselves. And so remember that your skills are important. And partner with other people to make sure to build those skills, hosting work days, volunteering, talking to other farmers, being involved with nonprofits. All this stuff is really important. Your financial considerations, remember that you're going to have more pressure and insecurity than a regular farm if you're on an unconventional farm. So make sure to transition into that. And don't go into debt unless you know that you're going to be okay. That way you don't get yourself in a sticky situation. And be practical about your needs. Don't buy stuff that you don't need, but remember that functional stuff is going to save time. And so invest wisely and understand your scale, because it's really easy to try to do too much too fast. And be creative about your income. Make sure that you're smart about what you're doing with your money and understand your financials. Agritourism is a great thing to do. You might not be able to make money off of just produce. We do class visits, farm stays, all that kind of stuff. And we do value-added and unique products. We actually grow wasabi on our farm, so we have organic wasabi that we're growing in western North Carolina, which is a really unique crop. And we do teas. We dry our herbs and do the teas instead of trying to do fresh herbs. And buy lots of rechargeable batteries, because small and unconventional farms, you're going to have a non-traditional schedule. We put lights in our greenhouse so that we can transplant at night, because it reduces that transplant shock for our plant starts. And realize if you're farming year-round and you're embracing this non-traditional schedule, you're going to need to schedule downtime and take breaks, do yoga, take naps. Our dog likes to take yoga naps. So make sure that you don't break yourself down, because if you're in pain and you're tired, you can't be productive. But most of all, be ready to be happier than you've ever been, because unconventional farms and ecological settings are really a paradise, and your paradise is waiting for you guys. So if anybody has any questions, now would be the time. And here's this list of resources if you guys want it. These are all the books that have been really valuable to me. So these are all folks that have got really good info. And that lettuce bubbler, the plans for that's at the University of Vermont. I know there were some folks asking about that in another talk that I went to. But yeah. Huh?
I do have a bubbler question. Like the aphids that float on the top, what do you do about that bubbler?
We have a skimmer, and so it's like a pool skimmer that we bought. Don't use your actual pool skimmer. But we just bought a pool skimmer, and so we'll just take that pool skimmer across. We don't do all of ours at once. We'll do it in rounds, and so we'll do some, and then we'll go across. But I'll be honest, if you really get that system down where you have a good ecological community, those aphids will become less and less of a problem on your lettuce, because those predatory insects will knock those aphids out. They're delicious to predatory insects. Yeah.
if our partner in Grime isn't already like an architect or designer, carpenter sort of thing, how do you end up learning those skills? Or where would you start to get those skills or find a buddy who's going to help you build stuff?
My husband took a bunch of classes at the local community college. And so he was actually a printer when we lived here in Kentucky. He worked at a company that did like t-shirt printing and stuff like that. So those were all skills. And also too, like I said, just volunteering. Like for our greenhouse, when we knew we wanted to do that, we went to 3 different farms and volunteered to help set up greenhouses before we ever tried to put one up on our farm. That way we knew what went into it, we knew what it entailed, and we knew like how we needed to grade the site and everything like that. So just helping other folks and just finding other farmers, young farmers that are excited about stuff. It's amazing the skills that people have, and if you partner with other people, you guys can always, have like work parties and share with each other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to speak up.
Yeah.
I'm curious about some of the sprays that you're using for tomatoes and other things you mentioned. Serenade, which is a facility.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the compost teas. What's working well for you for play or other things?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we don't do a lot of spraying, to be honest, because our plants are incredibly healthy, and just having that really rockin' soil ecosystem will really help you out a lot. But yeah, we do when we actually watch. Agricultural Extension has a map that you can look at it shows the country and it shows the blight sneaking towards you. And so when you know it's coming, we start spraying with Serenade weekly to help really boost that community on the leaves. And then we just make our own compost tea there on the farm, just using like a fish aquarium, bubbler, and buckets. And we just spray that on there. Because we do that slow, lazy composting method, we've got a lot of really good critters in our compost. And so we've had real good luck with that. And then when we do get the blight, we utilize oxidate or sanidate to actually knock it back. And then we immediately follow that with Serenade to reestablish the community. And we also, too, if we have plants that get really sick, we'll remove those individuals. And if you can just stay on top of it for a couple of weeks, a lot of times you can get ahead of a disease, and then it's gone, and then you don't have to fight it anymore. We also, as far as insects go, we use a lot of just neem oil, insecticidal soap, and things like that, just to knock those guys back. We try to stay away from stuff that's really toxic to pollinators. Sometimes we will use things that'll parasitize insects, and my brain is going totally blank, so I can't think of the name of that. But if you send me an email, I'll send you a complete list of all of the stuff that we use. I'm more than happy to do that. Anybody can email me or contact me or anything like that. I love chit-chatting with folks. And talk to me. I'll be here all weekend, so yeah, hit me up. And I know the talk went a little longer. I'm notoriously long-winded. It is one of my character flaws, but also it makes talking for an hour and a half, I guess, easier.
Could you talk to your starting seeds? You doing it all by hand?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it constantly? What's your setup for that?
Yeah, so we just have like some cheesy plastic shelves from Lowe's that we have in our basement. We have a wood stove that heats our house, so our basement's nice and toasty and warm down there. We'll put stuff that wants to be really warm closer to the wood stove, and stuff like lettuces that doesn't want it to be quite as warm a little further away or on the lower shelves. And then we just have, we have some nice grow lights, but most of them are just shop lights with grow bulbs in them. And then we'll get everybody outside under natural light as quickly as we possibly can in the greenhouse that's on the front of our house. Our passive solar greenhouse shares a wall with the basement of the house, so that wood stove heat's going in there and keeping that space really nice and warm. We really love the trays that come from like the Bootstrap Farmer and from Never Sink Farm that have the big open bottoms on them and they are root pruning trays. I feel like those have less transplant stress. But when it comes to starting things like peppers and tomatoes, we just put them all in one big flat, and then we just kind of gently massage them apart. And we start everything by hand in a seed start mix that we amend with our own compost. Yeah. So we joke kind of about how we went from being dirt bags to having bags of dirt. My husband left his job first and started his metalwork business, and then he was kind of running the farm. And then when we had our daughter, he stayed home and raised her. And then I was working at the college. I was a community college professor, and they don't make a whole lot of money, so we were already kind of living pretty frugally. And because of my health issues that I had, our plan really got accelerated, so we just had to kind of go for it. So we were embracing the fact that we were probably going to be eating a lot of our own produce. But one of the things that I have done is all the volunteer work that I've done. I do a lot of work with like food justice groups and help run the local farmers market. And by really putting myself out there and doing a lot of work in the community, it put me in touch with a lot of people that wanted to buy stuff. And so we were really fortunate that we got into a situation where basically everything that we grow is already sold, because we're selling to groups that are working to fight hunger in our community, and kind of being kind of crazy and shamelessly volunteering a lot has kind of like put us into a really good position. But for us, it was basically just, can we pay for our health insurance was our main thing, because, where we had set things up to be homesteaders and kind of already be independent, our income was a lot lower than the average household. Like, we don't have much of an electric bill because of the solar panels, and so I definitely recommend trying to get as self-sufficient as possible. Get that income, like while you're trying to work to build the income from your farm, also try to work to drop that number that you need down as much as you possibly can. Yeah. I think that's it. Either everyone's asleep or I did a good job.